Welcome to the bazaar. Today we're going to make full color custom wooden puzzles that are perfect for gifts. I'm super excited about today's project because we're going to incorporate sublimation, which if you haven't done that before, that's okay, you're in the right place. I'm going to do a bunch of testing to find the best way to get full color photos on wood. And then I'll show you how we can make our own custom puzzle designs and turn them into real products. I can't wait to get started, so let's just hop on in. So before we get started making the puzzle, I wanted to do some testing. And I know I want to make the puzzle out of wood, but I really want the image to pop. So I was wondering, is there a way to add a white film of some kind on the wood to make this sublimation ink pop? So I'm going to try on these little pucks that I've made with different surfaces on them. So this one's going to be painted white. And then I have one that I'm going to put white vinyl on. And then I have this stuff called direct-to-film powder that I'll show you to try that as well. And of course, we always have to have a control. So this will be just the plain wood, and we'll see how that comes out. And if we can make a more colorful puzzle. Hey everyone, voiceover Jeremy here to try and smooth some things over because testing went a little off the walls. But to explain what's going on, I first printed out a couple of test pictures using normal sublimation paper with normal sublimation ink, nothing special. And I'm going to attach them to a normal white vinyl covered piece of wood, a white acrylic painted piece of wood, and a plain piece of wood. And then for the test that's going to be with the direct-to-film powder, I actually made a wooden puck that is in thirds, 1/3 being vinyl, another third being paint, and another third being plain. So I didn't have to do 3 separate tests with the direct-to-film powder. Now the real challenge here is the fact that everything requires different settings. So the sublimation ink has its own heat press settings. The sublimation paper has its own heat press settings. The direct-to-film powder has its own heat press settings. So I'm going to try to walk that line and make the best setup for each one. So right here, I'm just setting up the basic sublimation paper tests, and then right after this, I'll go over how the direct-to-film powder works. That blue tape I'm using is heat-resistant tape. You can't use regular tape under a heat press because it'll melt. The first step to using the direct-to-film powder is the film itself. You can't use regular paper when trying to use the powder. You have to print on what is basically thin sheets of plastic that the sublimation ink doesn't get absorbed into. It actually just sits right on top. So here you can see it printing out. You have to be very careful when you take it out of the printer because, again, the ink is still wet. I'll have the film that I use listed below in the description, along with the paper and everything else that I use today. So now we're ready to add the direct-to-film powder to our printout. This process is a little bit messy, and there are quite a bit of steps, but it's great on fabrics so that you can do sublimation on things that aren't polyester, like cotton. But I've never tried it on wood or vinyl, so we'll see how that goes. But a lot of this stuff I have here is just for cleanliness sake. In fact, I usually wear a respirator while doing this, but you wouldn't be able to hear me. I have just a piece of parchment paper, and I have the ink side up for the printout. And then we have the direct-to-film powder itself. And I keep this in another bag. Again, it's a fine powder, so you obviously don't want to breathe that in if you don't have to. So all we got to do is get the powder onto the ink. The ink is still wet from the printer, so you don't want to touch anything at all, if at all possible. And you don't have to worry about precision because we're going to be able to reclaim any unused powder. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to spread this powder liberally on the printout. Whoop. See, I poured a bunch, but that's okay. And all I'm going to do is take the printout and slide the powder back and forth until I get a nice even coat over all of the ink. And then you can just lift it up and tap it, get some of that loose powder off. And it might be hard to see on camera, but there's a thin layer of powder now on the ink. And that's all we needed this setup for. So I'm gonna put this to the side. Again, making sure not to touch anything. And then here's where the parchment paper comes in handy. I'm just going to make a little paper funnel out of it and use that to pour the unused powder back into the bag. And just like that. And now we're going to follow the instructions that came with the powder to melt it onto the ink in the heat press. So let's hop it over to the heat press. Sorry. So strictly speaking, you don't have to melt the powder before placing it on your object. But if you don't, if you accidentally shift the print while it's touching your substrate, your t-shirt or the wood or whatever, it will smear. So by melting the powder now, it makes a more stable iron-on. And when this gets heated up, it's going to want to curl. So I do have some metal tools, just a metal ruler and Allen wrench, just to keep the plastic flat so it doesn't curl up and touch the heating element. The direct-to-film powder that I'm using recommends 320 degrees for about 60 seconds to melt the powder. So that's what I'm going to do. So again, putting it down and then using some metal weights to hold the paper from curling under the heat. And I'm not going to press it down. We're going to use this as a oven to heat it up from above and melt the plastic. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep an eye on the powder to make sure it melts into a nice even sheen. And you can see the plastic film wanting to curl. And that's why we put those metal tools on there. So I'm going to keep an eye on that and I'll bring you back. As it finishes melting, it becomes clear. See, it says it's been 55 seconds, but I can see that it needs a little bit more time. I'm gonna let it sit there for a bit to fully melted. Okay, so looks about good. I'm gonna turn this off and move the heat away from it. And if we take a look, we can see how clear that's become. And you can also see that the sublimation ink has really popped now. So we're gonna let this cool and re-solidify. And instead of being a powder, it'll be a plasticky film on the ink. And just remember, we use metal tools because we don't want them to melt under the heat, but that also means that they're hot, so we don't want to touch them just yet. So we'll let this cool off for a bit. And since I didn't want to waste an entire sheet of that direct to transfer film, I went ahead and printed a couple, and now that we've melted the powder, we have these guys that we can use later. We don't have to worry as much about touching it. No ink's coming off, the powder's not coming off. So you can save these for another time, or if you wanted to, if you had your own designs, you could make and sell iron-on patches that'll go on anything. So these will work on cotton and the like. But just like what we're testing today with the woods, you would want a light colored background. You can even do this DTF film onto white heat transfer vinyl on clothes. You do get a little bit of bleeding though. Okay, the heat press is all heated up. And so you can see we're starting with just the plain wood with the sublimation paper, going by exactly their directions. It fluctuates between 375 and creating. And so I'm going to slide this in and press it for 55 seconds. All right, so it's been a few minutes and it's cooled down. And the little trick I use is I blow some canned air on things to cool it down. So let's go ahead and see how it turned out. All right, so this is for the plane. And that actually looks really, really nice. Super happy with that. It's amazing. Even the white kind of shows. I don't know how that works, but that's pretty cool. So this is the standard to beat now with the different middle layers with paint to make a better white background. All right, let's go ahead and try the other ones. All right, now that that's cooled down, let's see what we got. Ooh, not a good sign. Oh no, awful, terrible. Nope. Nope. So, yeah, the paint adhered to the paper, and even the parts that I was able to peel off, still not even as vivid as the plain wood. So I'm gonna call that a fail. All right, and next up we have our vinyl. Oh no, it's taking the whole vinyl up with it. That's not good. Let's try to. Oh. Okay. Well, I have seen worse. Let's see if we can focus. There we go. So the colors are actually really vibrant and they're not smearing or anything like that. So this actually doesn't look half bad, other than obviously the vinyl sticking to the paper. I really want to try this with heat transfer vinyl and see if that would hold up better, because I really like the color on this guy.
Last up is the DTF powder.
Okay, so that's all cooled down now, and we can already see some interesting results. He definitely looks like spreading out on the paint and vinyl side. The wood looks good from the front, so let's try to peel it off now that it's cooled down. Now it's peeling actually really easily. So here we go, we can look up close. Really smudgy on the vinyl. Again, the vinyl doesn't really suck up anything, and that plastic film that the powder makes is just kind of on top of it and spread out. Same thing with the paint, actually, you can feel it. The wood looks okay. It has a nice smooth feel, but you can definitely see the powder spreading out, kind of lowering the quality of the image. It's definitely on there, but doesn't look the best. So here we are, and what did we learn? Well, we learned that you really can't use a substrate to make a surface that isn't sublimatable. So that's to say, if you wanted to sublimate on something that isn't conducive to it, you can't paint it, and you can't add vinyl to it. And I even tried off camera, I did heat transfer vinyl, and we got the same issue as vinyl. It just sticks into the vinyl, the paper. And also that, although I suppose you can use the direct-to-film powder on basically anything because it just makes a plastic film, I'm not super jazzed with, obviously, the paint or the vinyl, and the wood actually looks about the same quality as you get when you use it on fabrics, I've noticed, and as a perfectionist, I'm just not super happy with that. It's a little blotchy, almost looks like a film grain. So really what we learned is stick to surfaces that do sublimate well, like wood. This looks amazing. And if you want to sublimate on wood, choose a light color. That was one of the main things I wanted to try to do, is to see if I could make a subsurface that the sublimation ink could go on top of darker woods, and where you would still see the color. But it just doesn't look like any of the methods I've tried, be that paint or vinyl or DTF powder. It looks like just you gotta choose a light colored wood. So with that knowledge, let's get into something we can actually make. Well, as always, I couldn't leave well enough alone, and I had the idea that what if I did a whitewash on the wood, which looks the best, but didn't fully paint it where the paint actually gets stuck to the paper. Would it brighten up the wood any? So I took some scraps and another sublimation print and made this. So this I whitewashed with just a little bit of white acrylic paint and diluted it to basically be like milk, and painted it and sanded it 3 times to get a smooth surface and dried it. And it is whiter, so you definitely can whitewash it, and the paper didn't stick at all. So if you're going for a lighter image, that might work. Although in this particular instance, it looks like it kind of did both. It lightened the wood, but then also didn't absorb as much ink. So it's a paler color, but whiter, whereas the plain, bolder colors, but a darker background. So I think after all that, I'm sticking to my conclusion of using just plain wood, but it looks like you most certainly can whitewash the wood if you want honestly, it looks almost like a farmhouse aesthetic. If you're gonna do like text or something that you wanna show a farmhouse aesthetic on, you could whitewash it and then sublimate on, and it'll give a little bit of a desaturated look. But back to the show. So now that we've totally gone off the rails, I think it's time to rein things back in and get to making our family puzzle. And for that, we're gonna use just some light colored wood and some sublimation. Let's get started. So I know I wanna make a wooden puzzle, but one of my favorite parts of designing is actually thinking about the production of the item. To that end, let's go ahead and start with some design requirements. So I got my tablet out here to take some notes, and let's work it out. So I know my stock material, which is 3mm plywood, is gonna be exactly 12 inches tall by 20 inches wide. And I also know that I want the final product to fit in a standard bubble shipping envelope. And this one is exactly 9 inches by 6 inches worth of usable space. So now, something that I would like to be able to do is make the stock material be able to produce 2 different puzzles on it. So what I'm gonna do is imagine it cut in half. And so now I've got 6 inches usable there and 10 inches usable there. And the reason we're gonna have just 2 be made out of this is because we're gonna have a base that the puzzle lives on, and then we're gonna have the puzzle pieces themselves cut out. So we need twice the area of the puzzle per puzzle, if that makes sense. And so in doing this, we see that we're actually pretty much at exactly what our limitations are. We're at 6 inches tall, but it looks like we have about 10 inches of usable space, so we're gonna have to make it a little bit smaller to fit in our bubble mailer. And I also want the puzzle pieces to not just slide off the top at all. So I'm thinking of making a little perimeter around the puzzle pieces. So we're gonna have to account for that in our design as well. And I don't want to use the factory cut edges on the top and bottom of the plywood. So I'm actually going to have to shrink the height of these just a little bit as well. And since I have to cut it out twice, I think if I remove about a 1/2 inch to get the clean cut from the laser, then we're gonna have to make a little bit of a gap below the puzzle and between the two parts as well. So if we take the 1/2 inch that we're gonna want as waste product, we're going to divide that by 4 separate sections, because we got 1, 2, 3, and 4 areas of waste. And then that's for the height, but for the width we have a little bit more room for play, because at most it can only be 9 inches wide, but we have 10 inches of usable material per puzzle. So we just need to make sure that the final width, we'll again give it that 1/2 inch of wiggle room in the package. So instead of being 9 inches wide, we'll make sure that the final puzzle dimensions are 8.5 inches wide. And so doing a little math, for the vertical, we say we got 6 inches, and then we're going to have 1/2 inch of leeway total. So we have a 1/4 inch per side, so that means an 1/8 inch on each point. So this is going to be 0.8 inches, this will be 0.8 inches, and so on and so forth. So we're really losing a 1/4 in height, so that means we're going to leave 5.75 inches for the height. So our final puzzle dimensions are going to be 5.75 inches by 8.5 inches, and that's going to be for the full base, and that'll be the same for the top for the perimeter area. But then we want to decide how much space do we want as a perimeter around the puzzle pieces. This by a terrible drawing of what a puzzle kind of looks like. So we need to decide what we want this perimeter to be. And I think a 1/4 inch might be a little bit small. So if we do a 1/2 inch around, that's a 1/2 inch on each side. So we're going to have a usable space of 5.25. Oh, my bad. Nope. If we're taking 1/2 inch on both sides, that's an inch lost. So we're going to 4.75. Oh, I'm running out of space here. 4.75 inches tall. And then the puzzle will be, again, losing an inch from the 1/2 inch perimeter. We're going to have 7.5 inches wide. So we're going to make sure that our puzzle is 4.5 inches wide. 7.5 inches wide and 4.75 inches tall. And the perimeter is going to be a 1/2 inch around the whole area, giving a total area of 5.75 by 8.5 inches. And that should give us enough material to be able to make 2 puzzles per sheet of plywood. And of course, since we're stacking up, that'll make the puzzle 6 millimeters tall. All right, now that we know what we want, let's go ahead and hop onto the computer and actually draw it out.
So hopping into Illustrator, the first thing I did was just rough out the general shape that I wanted. So we see right here, it's 8.5 inches wide by 5.75 inches tall. And this just helps me see in perspective the kind of shape that we're going to get. Because the real fun part is using this website called Jigsaw Generator. This is a really cool site that I found that in real time creates vectors of jigsaw puzzles. So you have controls over lots of different things like the size of the tabs and the number of columns. So you can play with it however you want to fit the size and shape of puzzle that you're making. And it's just a really great tool that I found that I think you can have a lot of fun with. And so all you do is you shape it however you want. And once it looks good, you hit download and it downloads an SVG of your puzzle. And then you can bring that into Illustrator. Back in Illustrator, I went ahead and imported the puzzle design that I had generated. And what I did is I scaled it up to be just a hair larger than the section of wood that we're actually used for the puzzle. So that way we don't have to worry about the laser leaving a tab or something around the wood. So if we think about the order of operations, we're going to cut out the perimeter and then the inner perimeter, and then we're going to take the perimeter wood out and leave just the puzzle in, and then we'll run the laser and it'll cut all the way down and all the way across the wood, separating the pieces. Lastly, we need to decide what we actually want on the puzzle. And again, I was going for a nature theme with the plain wood. So I chose a picture from a family vacation to a place called Crater Lake. And I really wanted to punch up the color some. And so I just made some quick adjustments to it. And so we got that so we can see the colors a lot more vivid. Because again, the colors are going to be pretty muted on the wood. And then all I did was make sure I scaled that to be larger than needed for the puzzle so I don't have to worry about alignment, and printed this on sublimation paper. And to be able to get an idea of what it looks like, I went ahead and put it together in Illustrator, and this way we can kind of see, this is what we have to work with, and this is how I've scaled it. So I can see I liked this size, and it'll have some overlapping. That's okay. And then I just scaled it with these dimensions here in the top right in Photoshop to print. These plywood boards came pretty nice from the factory, but I do take a second to decide which side I want to be the front of it or the back of it, make a little mark on the front so I don't forget, and then I do a once over with some high grit sandpaper just to make sure we remove any splinters and get a nice even surface for when we do our sublimation. After everything looks good, I do some quick measurements just to mark out the center line of the plywood so I can mark out where everything should lay when we actually frame the cuts in the laser. This makes sure we keep on target with our design goal of being able to fit 2 puzzles on 1 piece of ply. Now that we've got everything marked out, I'm just going to use some basic masking tape to make a perimeter around the section that we're going to cut so that we don't get any scorching from the laser. Any thin plywood you use is going to be warped in one way or the other, but this piece was pretty egregiously warped, so I actually went ahead and used the laser to just cut it right in half. The closer we can get to the final product size, the less distortion we're going to see overall. And you also want the stock to be as flat as possible when cutting on the laser because the focus point of the laser is pretty thin. I'm not really doing anything fancy in Lightburn today, so I'll just do a quick rundown here. Here you can see I have the two perimeters, so the outside and then the inside cut, and then I have the actual pieces that are going to get cut out. And first I cut through the outside and inside through the masking tape, and then we're going to cut the puzzle piece after we've sublimated it, and that's why we've allowed a little overhang here at the top and sides, so that we make sure that we cut all the way through the puzzle, and we'll have the perimeter out so we don't have to worry about burning it either. And just a quick little note, in case you're ever doing something like this, I actually didn't even bother using the rectangle from Illustrator. It's easy enough to just make a rectangle in Lightburn how you want, and then you can use the radius tool to set the radius, and we can see just like that. And since I knew how thick the perimeter I wanted, you can use the offset shapes tool right here. You can say inward or outward, and I wanted ended up being, I think in the design I originally said I wanted a ½ inch around. That seemed a little excessive, so I wanted a little bit more room for the puzzle pieces, so I did about a ½ inch around, so that's 6.35 millimeters as an offset.
All right, so now we've got our three pieces. We have the back/bottom of the puzzle. We have the frame that's going to keep the puzzle pieces in, and we have the piece that is going to be turned into the pieces, and they all fit together just like that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to glue the perimeter to the backing, and since I left all that painter's tape on, I'm actually going to just use an X-Acto knife to cut that around, peel it off, and then apply some basic wood glue, and then use all the clamps I've got to hold it down around the edge, and we'll be good to go.
Glue squeeze out here isn't actually that big of a concern. I figured just because we already have the masking tape there, might as well use it. It takes just a few moments to cut around the perimeter and peel off that tape. And in all honesty, even with the little amount of work it probably was more work than it was worth.
All right, so while we're waiting for that wood glue to dry, we're ready to go ahead and start the sublimation process. We're gonna sublimate the image first, so that way we don't have to worry about all the pieces moving when we try to get the image on it, and then we'll cut it out. So take this painter's tape off from when we cut it out. Give it a quick wipe down, make sure there's no dust or soot on it left over. And here's the picture I chose. And as you can see, Sublimation ink looks pretty dull at first, but once we heat it, it'll really liven it up. I've oversized this, so it's bigger than the puzzle. So we have ample wiggle room when we're setting it up. So I've got my heat resistant tape right here, and we're just gonna tape that on and throw it in the heat press. And since this is so much oversized, I can actually just put the puzzle down on top of it, arrange it how I'd like it. That looks good. I'm gonna cut out mostly of the sky because I feel like that's the least interesting part of it. So line it up right there, and then I'm gonna take some of that heat resistant tape and tape it on. It doesn't really try to move when it's put down under a heat press, because the heat press goes straight down. So it's just really to keep it in the general location. Okay, and there we go. We're ready to throw this in the heat press, obviously this way down. All right, so I've let this cool for a few moments. Be able to touch it. Something I noticed right away is actually the wood has warped quite a bit, probably from the moisture in the wood. I might actually have to flatten it on the other side, we'll see. But let's go ahead and peel this off. Okay, and there we go. So we have our puzzle with our picture. If you look, it's quite warped. I'm gonna steam press it again this way to see if it evens itself out a bit. So I actually did decide to put it back in the heat press face down, and it worked surprisingly well. This is nice and flat now. So we're almost ready to laser cut it into a puzzle, but before that, we don't want a bunch of scorch marks all over this. So just like before, we're going to take some painter's tape and tape over the whole face of it, so when we cut it, we don't get a bunch of burning. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Make sure we overlap the seams so that no burning goes under, and we're ready to cut. This video is already getting long enough, so I'll save you some details. The only thing that I think is important to notice is that on the second pass cutting through the puzzle pieces, I had quite a lot of flare-up, like substantial sustained flames while cutting. And I think that has to do with the fact that this piece of just 3mm plywood has been in a heat press twice now and has ink on it, so I think it's just super dry, and just going over it twice didn't give the wood time to cool down, so the flare-ups that are happening only happened on the second pass when cutting through. The first pass didn't have any issue, but the second pass is definitely flared up quite a bit. So I don't know if the solution would be to just do all the lines once and then all the lines again to give the wood some time to cool down, or maybe just one higher powered cut might do it. But just another reason why you always need to keep an eye on your laser. Okay, so I literally slid the puzzle onto my cutting mat in the laser, so I haven't been able to see how well they did or didn't cut, but it feels nice and loose, and I'm just super excited to see how it came out. So let's flip it over. Let's see, I'll just flip the whole thing over and see if it cut out. Oh, that looks great. Look at that. Perfect, perfect. Oh man, it looks so good. Okay, so some of them just require a little wiggle, but they look awesome. So let's go ahead and peel off some of the tape and let's see how it came out. Got high hopes. Oh, perfect. No char at all. You can see that's part of the mountain right there. Let's see. And what I like about this, using plywood over using the chipboard that I used to make those Pokemon card puzzles, is the chipboard leaves a lot of ash on the edges, but plywood, when you burn it, doesn't leave ash at all. So it's much easier. You just peel the painter's tape off, and there's really no cleanup at all, which is really great. Oh, excellent. And there we can see the trees coming out. So I'm gonna go ahead and unwrap this, and we'll see how it looks all together. You'd think with how much I like making puzzles that I do solve puzzles a lot. And I mean, I probably solve more puzzles than the average person, but I definitely make more puzzles than I solve. And it's worth making the tape be on there really well so that no scorch marks get under it, even if it means taking it off is just that much more difficult. All right, so I gave it a once over with some high grit sandpaper just by hand, just to clean it up some, and it looks great. So there's nothing left to do but to try and solve it. Almost there. And last piece. And done. Wow. That came out amazing. What can I say? This came out absolutely phenomenal. I bet the color theorists among you might have realized blue ink plus yellow wood makes purple skies, but you know, I think this looks great. You could paint the frame and the base. You could put a seal coat on it. You could do anything like that. I wanted to use a nature picture, so I wanted to keep the wood natural, and I think it came out great. You really can't beat the precision of that laser. Look at those puzzle pieces fit perfectly in there. Doesn't shake at all. So you could complete this, pack it, seal it. You could send this as a gift, family photos, and the puzzle's as difficult as you want to make it. I chose a pretty easy one for myself, but it came out great. As always, I want to thank you guys for joining us today at the Bazaar. I hope you had fun and learned something. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for new crafting videos. And I can't wait to see you next time at the Bazaar. Oh, and I almost forgot. Time to see if it fits in our design requirements. So I got that bubble mailer, got the puzzle. Now let's see. Oh boy. An absolutely perfect fit. So great thing to send out to friends and family.